Imagine opening an old file and seeing a name tied to some of the darkest kinds of crimes, and then watching that case become the center of a national political firestorm. That's roughly how the story of William McLean, now known as July Justine Shelby, unfolded. McLean's past reads like a chronicle of serious, violent offenses. In his early criminal history, he was convicted of child rape and molestation, including sexually assaulting a 9-year-old boy and raping a 17-year-old girl. Those crimes put him in prison for many years. After serving time and being released, McLean didn't stay out of trouble. In 2016, he was arrested again, this time on federal charges for distributing child pornography, including graphic images of abuse involving very young children. He was sentenced to a lengthy 15-year federal prison term. What made McLean's case unusual and what dragged it into the national spotlight wasn't just the severity of his crimes, but what came next.
While McLean was in federal custody, he began to identify and live as a woman, adopting the name July Justine Shelby. Under policies in the federal prison system that take gender identity into account for housing decisions, McLean pushed to be transferred from a men's federal prison to a women's facility. He argued that keeping him in a men's prison violated his rights. That request was denied multiple times inside the Bureau of Prisons, BOP. Officials said they were concerned about the safety of women inmates, given McLean's history. But in 2022, a federal magistrate judge, Sarah Netburn, reviewed McLean's case and wrote a report recommending that McLean be moved to a women's prison. She concluded that the BOP had violated his rights and that concerns about him hurting women were overblown, noting he hadn't committed another contact offense in decades and applying legal reasoning about his medical and constitutional claims. Netburn's recommendation was adopted by the district judge, and McLean was transferred to the Federal Medical Center, FMC Carswell, a women's federal prison in Fort Worth, Texas, where he remains incarcerated.
The transfer ignited a political storm. During Judge Netburn's 2024 Senate confirmation hearing for a different lifetime judicial position, Republican senators zeroed in on her recommendation in McLean's case. They asked tough questions about how McLean's crimes was weighed against his gender identity in deciding where he should be housed. Some senators even described McLean in stark terms, emphasizing his criminal record and raising concerns about women's safety. And the issue became a major factor in the Senate Judiciary Committee ultimately voting to reject Netburn's nomination. Supporters of Netburn said her recommendation was based on law and constitutional rights, and that she wasn't the final decision-maker, only offering a report that a district judge then adopted.
Do you remember an inmate named William McLean, also known as July Justine Shelby?
Yes, I know who you're referring to.
Okay. Mr. McLean raped a child, didn't he?
30 years ago, the petitioner in the habeas case before me...
Did he rape a child?
He pled guilty to that crime, yes.
And then he raped a 17-year-old girl, right?
Again, this case was handled by the state court in Indiana, but I'm
just asking you the facts. Don't stall on me now. Did he rape a 17-year-old girl or not after raping a 9-year-old boy?
I believe that's what he pled guilty to.
Okay, and then he went to prison, didn't he?
Yes.
And then he came out and he sent child porn, basically adults, little children, to another offender. And he was sent back to prison, right?
Yes, this time to federal prison.
Thank you. And then he decided to transition, and he became a female and started going by July Justine Shelby. Is that right?
Yes.
Miss Shelby said, I don't want to go to a male prison. I want to go to a female prison. And the Board of Prisons said, what planet did you parachute in from? You're going to a male prison with this kind of record. And you sent him to a female prison, didn't you? You said that the Board of Prisons was trying to violate Ms. Shelby, former Mr. McLean's constitutional rights, didn't you?
I recommended finding that under Estelle versus Gamble...
Why won't you admit that was your ruling? Are you ashamed of it today?
I'm not. I'm answering the question. I applied Estelle versus Gamble.
Was that your ruling?
My recommendation was that the petitioner's serious medical needs were being denied by keeping her in a men's facility.
A violation of the Eighth Amendment, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And you told the Board of Prisons, well, She'll be okay. The other women in the female prison will be okay because it's only hypothetical that Ms. Shelby, Mr. McLean would reoffend again.
I did recommend that after finding a constitutional violation.
What were you thinking in saying it's only hypothetical that she would reoffend?
The medical evidence made clear that for the last 5 years, the petitioner was sober and hormonally entirely a female, and there was no evidence.
The Board of Prisons didn't agree with you.
The petitioner pled guilty to that crime as well.
So was he guilty?
I hope so, because she pled guilty to it.
He was a he when he did this.
That's correct.
Then, after serving in prison, Mr. McLean was released for parole, but then violated the terms of parole by having internet and was sent back to prison. 1 year after being released again, he was convicted of having child pornography. Is that correct?
I'm unclear on exactly the time frame that you're at, but the petitioner was convicted.
And this individual, 6'2", biologically a man. A minute ago, you said this individual was, quote, I wrote it down, sober and entirely a female. Well, did this individual have male genitalia?
I think what I said, or at least what
That is a verbatim quote, entirely a female.
Sorry, what I meant to say was hormonally a female.
Okay, but that's not entirely. Did this individual have male genitalia?
Yes.
So you took a 6'2" serial child rapist with male genitalia, and he said, I'd like to be in a women's prison. And your answer was, that sounds great to me. Let me ask you something. The other women in that prison, do they have any rights?
Is that a question you're asking me?
Yes, the other women in that prison, do they have any rights?
Of course.
Do they have the right not to have a 6'2" man who is a repeat serial rapist put in as their cellmate?
Every person who's incarcerated has the right to be safe in their space.
But you didn't think so. You didn't think so. And in fact, I'm going to give some quotes. The Bureau of Prison argued that if you put this person in a female prison, there will be a risk of sexual assault to the women. And you know what you did? You wrote, quote, the Bureau of Prisons claim penological interest in protecting female prisoners from sexual violence and trauma. But there are no signs that petitioner is at risk of reoffending.
But I want to follow up with Judge Nett Byrne regarding the JJS case. Every time this person has had an opportunity to offend, this person has offended. And yet you recommended this person against the recommendation of the U.S. Bureau of Prisons to go to a women's facility. Now, your reasoning here is stunning to me. You say, quote, there are no signs that petitioner is at risk of reoffending. I'm struggling to understand how you could possibly conclude that, because the minute this person was released, this person engaged in other offenses. Yes, not a contact offense while out on parole, but there are still issues going on. It says nothing. You don't adequately grapple with the obvious fact that this is a 6'2" biological male. Yes, transition aside, the transition didn't begin until age 51 or 52. By then, JJS had acquired all of the physical, biological size and strength advantages of being male. Those don't go away because there is a transition. On what planet does it make sense? On what planet does that person with that sexual offense history, with being biologically male and also 6'2", not pose a threat to the safety of female inmates? I don't understand how you could conclude that this person shows no risk of being an offender. You argue at one point that this person has shown no pattern or history of offending while in prison. Yeah, because JJS was in prison with a bunch of other men. Why is it okay? Why is it safe? Why is it fair to female inmates to send this person to a female prison? This is a guy who raped a 17-year-old girl and a 9-year-old boy. Why is that safe?
McLean is still at FMC Carswell, classified as a female inmate, and federal records have indicated a projected release date in September 2029. There have also been unverified reports from some outlets claiming disciplinary issues like exposing himself to other inmates, but these come from sources with particular editorial perspectives and aren't confirmed by official prison records made public. This sadly isn't the only time a predatory male was allowed in a women's prison. Amy Ichikawa spent 5 years in a California women's prison, and when she got out, she didn't walk away quietly. Instead, she became a voice for the women she left behind. Women who, she says, were suddenly sharing cell blocks and private areas with men who now identified as women. Her experience became part of a broader wake-up call from a group called Independent Women, a women's advocacy organization. They released the report, Cruel and Unusual Punishment, Stopping the Dangerous Policies, Putting Men in Women's Prisons, and the narrative they paint is a stark one.
2009, I was convicted of terrorist threats with a firearm, and I spent 5 years in a California state prison. As soon as I left, my immediate desire was to be able to go back in and help the women that I'd left behind. And it didn't really become a reality until 2021, when California started housing fully intact trans-identified male inmates in the women's prisons. I was receiving an overwhelming amount of messages. I still do. I just wanted to provide services and be like a resource center for women that were coming back into the free world from long-term incarceration. But as soon as it started happening and I started receiving hundreds and hundreds of phone calls and letters, I had to shift gears entirely and focus on this. I didn't understand the weight of this issue at all. I didn't think anyone in their right mind would object to the stance I'd taken on ensuring there are no fully intact, fully operational male prisoners, many of whom are violent sex offenders, being forcibly housed in women's general population. I couldn't have been more wrong. This has been the biggest uphill 4-year battle that I could have ever imagined. I have no intention of stopping, but I know that this report is going to mark the beginning of the end of the continued cruel and unusual punishment and torture of incarcerated women across the country. Most people think that I'm insane or I'm lying when I say that there are fully intact, fully operational, non-hormone taking, non-gender reassignment surgery, self-identified male trans inmates in female prisons. It's because the laws are based on self-identification. The only requirement is for someone to state that they are a female, and they go through in front of a review board, and then they're more than likely transferred, because there's very few reasons that you can use as a denial, because everything is deemed as discriminatory. You can't base your denials on physical attributes, including retention of a penis. You can't deny somebody a transfer based on criminal history. So this is a person with a penis with a long history of violence against women, many sex crimes, and they would still be qualified for a transfer to women's prison. Well, I understand how difficult it is for regular Americans who haven't been impacted by the carceral system or have been involved with anybody in prison or been in prison themselves to see the significance of handling this issue immediately. But what our government will do to the least of us, they'll do to all of us. And what we continue to allow to happen to women in women's prison will eventually wind up at your doorstep. The trans community has been hijacked as a hiding place for very mentally unwell sex criminals. This is a perfect Trojan horse into the biggest victim pool anyone could ever hope and dream of. There's trans women that I speak to in men's prisons that want nothing to do with this and are horrified at the people that the states and federal institutions are allowing to transfer over there. This is disturbing to them as much as it is to us. There's a huge misconception about who they are. There was a convicted serial rapist who was extradited from Texas, served their life sentence for the rape of a mother and daughter in the women's prison in the same county where the rapes occurred. So many of the women that I was in prison with were fully aware of this case and very familiar with the ins and outs of this case. This individual is currently male presenting and, in medium security. This person is serving life without the possibility of parole in a medium security women's prison. When I was there, this person was combative and angry and wanted to bring male prison politics into the female environment. Hannah Tubbs sexually assaulted a little girl when they were 17 years old. So our DA thought it was in their best interest to house them in a girls' side of the juvenile facility. And that was the most insane thing I'd ever heard in my life. Hannah Tubbs also bashed someone's brains in and only received 15 years for that crime. And I can't help but think that that has something to do with their trans-identified status, because most people I know that have bashed someone's brains in get a life sentence, but not Hannah. I don't too much know what to do with California legislators, which is why I moved on to a federal level, because I can't just worry about one state. This is happening from coast to coast. And we can't forget about the women in the county jails or the federal prisons where there's really nobody to ask for help from. And it's on top of the anxiety of being assaulted by staff. Now you have to look, like, keep your head on the swivel at all waking hours and when you're asleep. There is no respite from potential abuse. The retaliation that they're so deeply afraid of is real. Most women are afraid to file reports or to complain because they know that half the time, even on a federal level, their complaints are going to be thrown out. They're going to be laughed at. They're going to be ignored, and it's not going to do anything. All it's going to do is disrupt their lives, give them another reason to be retaliated against, put them at a greater risk. I don't think they even think about women. They don't think about women unless they're men pretending to be women. Very hateful. It's anti-human. It's anti-people. It's anti-American. Under no circumstances does any of this stuff make sense. What they're hurting Hannah Tubbs just as much as they're hurting the juvenile female population. They're hating everyone because they're not taking anyone's well-being or safety into consideration. It's not healthy to put a sex offender in a situation where they will reoffend. Not if they will, but they will reoffend. You're ruining their life again. You're ruining the victims' lives. You're depriving everyone of the opportunity to rehabilitate or heal from the original traumas that got them there in the first place. They're pumping all these, federal and state prisoners full of hormones. You don't even need a diagnosis to get on testosterone right now. They're just giving it out. The depths of the depravity here is insane and unbelievable, but because people are hesitant or just not interested in the well-being of the least of us, it goes unnoticed for decades. This time last year, I got a call that a woman had been assaulted really pretty badly in the prison where I was housed in. And I contacted the prison. I let them know, for the sake of all parties involved, would you please deem this individual a danger to the population and transfer them, not just for these alleged victims, but for this person too. You can't put them in this situation again and again. If you treat the least of us like this, you can guarantee that it's coming for you too. You can tell so much about a nation by the way they treat their prisoners. And right now, if I was looking from the outside, I would just assume that America hates women.
Tubbs is accused of robbing and killing a man, Michael Clark, in 2019 and was arraigned yesterday afternoon where she pleaded not guilty. The man's body was found in the Kern River in August of 2019. Tubbs, who now identifies as a woman, was charged under her former name, James Tubbs, as she identified as a man at the time. Tubbs has been serving a 2-year sentence in a juvenile facility for the sexual assault of a 10-year-old girl in the bathroom of a Palmdale Denny's. Tubbs committed the crime at 17 and was later linked to the assault by DNA in 2019. Tubbs was arrested in 2021 and allowed to plead guilty in a Los Angeles County juvenile court because of a policy implemented by DA George Gascon that barred minors from being charged as adults. The district attorney faced criticism for this decision, but the controversy grew when jailhouse calls of Tubbs mocking her sentence were made public.
I'm going to plead to it. I'm going to go ahead and plead out to it because they're just going to stick me on probation. It's a strike. Don't worry about it. It's a strike. But they're going to plead. I'm going to plead out to it. I'm going to plead guilty. They're going to stick me on probation, and it's going to be dropped. It's going to be done. I won't have to register. I won't have to nothing.
Gascon later admitted he made a mistake in the handling of the Tubbs case and has since backed down on his policy regarding juveniles never being charged as adults. They can now be prosecuted as adults in certain situations. The lead prosecutor for the Tubbs case in LA County reacted to the new charges Tubbs is facing in a statement saying, "I'm extremely relieved that Kern County has filed murder charges against Tubbs."
At its heart, the report begins with something that sounds almost impossible in America policies that allow male inmates to be housed in women's prisons simply because they say they identify as female. Not because of anatomy, not because of criminal history, just because they say so. The report describes how, in recent years, state and federal policies have increasingly opened the door to these transfers. It argues that governments have leaned on interpretations of laws like the Prison Rape Elimination Act, PREA, and the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, that weren't actually designed to force mixed-sex housing, yet that's precisely what's happening in some places. What's more, the report says these policies ignore basic biological differences and the trauma many incarcerated women have already survived. And that's where the real human stories come in. According to the report, male prisoners who identify as women are disproportionately likely to have histories of violent or sexual offenses, and when they're placed in female facilities, women face higher risks of harassment and assault in cells, showers, and other private spaces.
California has passed legislation allowing transgender inmates in the state's correctional facilities to be assigned housing based on their gender identity.
We were very nervous, angry. We weren't given a voice.
No one asked us how we felt about this. No one did.
In September, California Governor Gavin Newsom signed Senate Bill 132 into law.
As soon as the transfer started, there were people having sex on the yard, in the porta potties.
We're getting the predators, the sexual predators, people who have been incarcerated for rape, men who have been incarcerated for oral copulation, men who have been incarcerated for crimes against women.
California now joins Connecticut, Rhode Island, New York City, and Massachusetts in recognizing inmates' gender identity.
They were like kids in a candy store because they knew they were going from a men's prison to a female's prison.
If this doesn't constitute bigotry, I don't know what does.
Women's safety, their mental health, overall well-being, everything has been compromised.
And if you're purposely putting a predator amongst prey, so to say, I don't got to tell you what's going to happen.
Women's rights in a women's prison do not exist.
Two female inmates are pregnant after they had sex with another inmate at the Edna Mahan Correctional Facility for Women in Clinton. That's the Department of Corrections. Last year, Edna Mahan began housing transgender inmates who identify as female. That's after a lawsuit filed by a trans woman who was forced to live in men's prisons. The DOC would not provide details on what actions they took in response to the pregnancies, but says they're taking measures to ensure the health and the safety of all inmates there.
A convicted criminal who served time at the women's prison in Chowchilla is charged with raping fellow inmates. A Madera County judge says Tremaine Carroll must be referred to with she, her pronouns. But the district attorney is pushing back because the 52-year-old Carroll is a biological male and the decision could impact the pursuit of justice. Court records show Carroll was convicted in Los Angeles County in 1993 for aggravated kidnapping for the purpose of ransom or to commit another crime. Carroll is now serving time in a men's prison as this rape case moves forward.
A Madera County judge ruled this week 52-year-old state prisoner Tremaine Carroll must be referred to with she, her pronouns because Carroll identifies as a woman. But the district attorney believes the defendant is abusing the system.
This is a person who's not a woman in any sense of the word.
In March, DA Sally Moreno charged Carroll for rape allegedly committed while incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla.
After his first cellmate became pregnant and was moved to Los Angeles, two other cellmates of his complained that he had raped them. So we have filed rape charges against this inmate.
Moreno says the ruling regarding pronouns impacts her ability to prosecute the case.
This is a particular issue in this case because it's confusing to the jury. In California, rape is a crime that has to be accomplished by a man.
Supervising Deputy DA Eric Dutemple says it's also unfair to the victims.
It's just absolutely insane that a victim would have to get on the stand and police their pronouns and their usage when trying to recite one of the most scariest times in their lives.
Carroll was allowed to serve time in a women's prison despite being a biological male because of Senate Bill 132, the Transgender Respect Agency and Dignity Act, which took effect in 2021. It allows inmates to be housed with the gender they identify as. The CDCR website points out state law prohibits discrimination based on gender identity.
There's no psychological evaluation that needs to be done. This person doesn't need to be on cross-gender hormones. They don't need to be signed up for transgender surgery. They don't even need a significant psychological evaluation regarding gender confusion. The mere statement is enough.
Independent Women doesn't just sketch a plan, it offers a roadmap for change. It says lawmakers and prison officials should amend PREA regulations so they can't be used to justify housing based solely on gender identity, clarify that the ADA doesn't require mixed-sex housing or gender-affirming medical procedures in prison, protect women's rights to report abuse without retaliation, tie federal prison funding to policies that genuinely prioritize the safety and dignity of female inmates. The report's findings rippled out into state policy debates. It called out blue states like California, Connecticut, Maine, and New Jersey for allowing biological males who identify as female into women's prisons, a practice, the group says, reflects ideological decisions made at the expense of women's safety.
According to the report, an Illinois inmate named Andre Patterson, a convicted murderer, ended up housed in a women's prison not because of surgery or long-term transition, but after identifying as transgender. He joined a lawsuit pushing the state to provide gender-affirming care to inmates. In 2019, corrections officials approved the transfer. Almost immediately, things went sideways. After arriving at Logan Correctional Center, Patterson allegedly sexually assaulted a female inmate. That incident raised alarms among staff and other incarcerated women, who questioned how someone with a violent criminal history was placed in a women's facility in the first place.
Here's where the situation gets even more complicated. Patterson later told prison officials he no longer wanted hormone treatments and no longer identified as transgender. Normally, that would trigger a re-evaluation and likely a transfer back to a men's prison. But the state couldn't just move him. A judge ruled that Illinois officials must give Patterson advance notice and the opportunity to challenge any transfer, effectively tying the hands of corrections administrators. As a result, despite the safety concerns and the inmate's own statements, officials were left unable to remove him from the women's prison. The article frames this as a case where policy and legal pressure overrode common-sense safety decisions, leaving female inmates exposed while the state navigates lawsuits, court orders, and evolving rules around gender identity in prisons.
Zooming out, this case sits in the middle of a much larger national fight. States and federal courts are wrestling with how to balance the rights of inmates who identify as transgender, medical and legal standards around gender dysphoria, and the safety of women housed in female correctional facilities. Supporters of current policies argue they protect vulnerable inmates from harm, while critics say cases like this show how the system can be manipulated, with real consequences for others who have no say in the matter. In the end, the story isn't just about one inmate. It's about what happens when ideology, litigation, and prison safety collide, and how difficult it's proving for officials to fix a mistake once the courts get involved.
Across the conversation, one theme stands out. These decisions are not abstract. They touch real lives. For women inside prisons, the stakes are deeply personal. Physical safety, emotional trauma, and the question of who gets to define safety and dignity when someone is behind bars. And as Amy's voice echoes through the pages of that report and the corridors of policy debates, what emerges isn't just a headline. It's a story of one group trying to be heard and of many voices urging others to look closely at the consequences of how we define fairness and protection for all.